generation, so my grandma was actually the first of the sod farmers in our family, and she ran the farm from 1969 until the late 80s or early 90s, and then my parents bought it from her in the early 90s, and then my parents are still owning it and working at it, and I am helping them run the business, and someday I will take over. And to start with, I wanted to show you a little bit about what sod is and what it looks like. So I brought a piece for you here today. With sod, this is exactly what you would have in your lawn. So people don't really think about where lawn and grass come from, but it grows on farms just like anything else. And I've got some harvesters here that I'll show you in just a little bit. But to give you an idea, we've got the grass here on top, and then when we harvest it, you can see right here that we don't take very much topsoil at all. We try to keep it less than 1/4 of an inch. It kind of depends on how wet the ground is when we get out here with the harvesters. And then you have lots and lots of root matter. You can see that there are lots of roots in this first section right here. 80% of the roots for grass plants are in the top 3 inches of the soil, and then the remaining 20% can go as deep as 10 to 12 feet depending on which species of grass you have. So there are really, really deep roots that'll go down to look for water, but a lot of the roots that stay up here are the ones that are looking for food up here toward the surface in the topsoil. And then we'll also have a little bit of thatch in here. Thatch is basically the clippings. Oops, I just dropped it. Here we go. Thatch is basically the clippings from when you go out and mow your yard or when your parents are mowing your yard. Those clippings will break down over time and create more organic matter that turns into more topsoil for your yard. So we like a little bit of thatch. Thatch is kind of a good thing, and it can help put more nutrients back in the soil. So I brought this here to show you, and if anybody has questions about that later, you can let me know. But in the meantime, let's maybe show you some of the harvesters, how we get these pieces. So this piece right here, this is 40 inches long and 20 inches wide, and it comes from this machine right here. This machine, we call it the automatic. It was made by a company called Princeton. And what happens, you can maybe see down in here, there's a roller and a blade that get the grass, like that we can adjust how deep the blade goes into the ground. And then the sod will come up, it'll go up all of these conveyor belts all the way up to the top, and then we come all the way to the back, and there will be a pallet sitting right in here, and those pieces will drop down in those perfect little 40 by 20 inch sizes, and the pallet will get lower and lower and lower as it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And then when the pallet is all full, it'll drop on the ground, and the next pallet will feed in, and so the person can just keep right on driving. And we try to keep those pallets all about the same size, but they get really, really heavy when it rains outside. So they'll weigh 1,500 pounds each, like for those pallets, which is about as much as a pickup truck can carry in one load. So like a Ford F-150 that a lot of people are familiar with, it can carry one pallet at a time. They're so heavy. And then we also harvest our sod with a different machine right over here. And let me know if you want me to do anything else here.
Okay.
But the other way that we harvest our sod is with a machine like this. This is called a big roll machine, and it makes a roll of sod. It looks like a huge roll of toilet paper when you're all done with it, and it will harvest the sod. It'll cut down here with the blade just like the other, come up this conveyor belt, and then it'll spin the sod around and around and around and around and around. And then when it's all done, it'll look like this big roll of toilet paper, but that roll of toilet paper will weigh almost 1,000 pounds. And that roll of toilet paper is a bunch of sod that then the homeowner or the contractor, the person who's installing the sod at the new house or the new football field or the new baseball field, they'll just unroll that sod with some equipment, and then it'll just save everybody lots and lots of time. But they're very, very heavy. People can't carry those around, right? And then I also brought you something fun that I thought you would see this morning. If you come over here, this is our mower. And lots of people are familiar with the little push mowers that you use at home, but this mower is super, super big. This one is 36 feet wide. There are 5 different mower decks that you can see here. And this is pulled by kind of a medium-sized tractor. You can see our John Deere tractor right over here. We can mow 40 acres of sod in an hour with this mower. So like for my yard at home, I think I would only need to do like 2 quick passes. I'd be done in like a minute. But when we do these big fields, if you turn and look right out here, when we do our big fields with them, it'll take us about an hour to do 40 acres. So it would take us about 4 hours to do this area that you see all around us here. And right in front of us, you can actually see, so Morgan asked me to tell you a little bit about how we grow the sod. So if we come right over here, I can tell you a little bit about it. Sod is a really different kind of product. We don't have, you know, one time of year that we harvest. We actually harvest almost every day. We can harvest any day of the year that the ground isn't frozen. So usually we'll harvest from like the middle of March until the middle of December. It kind of depends on the year. Mother Nature decides when we start and stop. And then we'll harvest even in January or February if the weather will let us, but it's not something that we really can rely on. What we'll do is we plant 2 times a year, and let's see, how do I explain this? I should have thought about this a little better. So it takes us about 1 year to grow a crop. We have 400 acres here, and every year we're hoping to sell about 200 acres. And so every year we have 200 acres that are getting ready and going into production, and then we have another 200 acres that we can harvest and are ready to go, because it takes us so much time to create it, if that makes sense. So there are 2 times of year we can seed. We can seed in usually about May, the beginning of May, and then we can seed again kind of around like August, kind of the middle of August to the middle of September. And so it just kind of depends on how many acres we have available to seed during that time. That is really what helps us to know how many acres we'll seed for each stand. In between those times, if we have ground that we've harvested, we don't want it to just sit. We don't want there to be problems with wind erosion or water erosion and things like that. So we'll do like what you see here. This is actually a cover crop that we planted. And so this is actually just holding the soil in place and making sure that we don't lose soil to wind, putting some nutrients back into the soil. We won't harvest this. We'll come out and we'll actually mow it down. And once it gets mowed down, then we'll come out and we'll prep the ground and we'll get it ready, and we will seed this section right here in probably May of next spring to get it ready. And it's really far away. You probably can't see it very well, but beyond this cover crop, way far out there, that is actually some sod that is ready for harvest over there. So we can harvest that still this fall or early next spring, and then once that is stripped off, we'll put it in cover crop, and then it will be ready to plant probably next August or September. Does that make sense? It's kind of weird. We always have like this weird like back and forth of how we're doing things. It is kind of interesting because there are 2 times of year, of course, then where we're both planting and harvesting at the same time. And though that time of year can get really crazy, where it's just everybody's running all over the place and we have customers coming everywhere, and it's just wild. So that's always fun.
So what kind of varieties of grass do you plant? Do you offer different kinds of sod to your customers, or just one kind?
That's a really good question. So we grow Kentucky bluegrass here, which is a species of grass, but there are many different species of grasses that sod farms grow all over the United States. It just kind of depends on the climate. That's kind of the big driver for what you would want to plant. We like Kentucky bluegrass because it's called a cool season grass, and what that means is it doesn't really like the heat of summer. Like anytime it gets higher than 85 degrees, it's not particularly happy, which is kind of too bad because our summers can be very hot. But the benefit of it is that it doesn't mind cold temperatures at all. So when we have those really cold winter days in the winter, Kentucky bluegrass will be fine and come out of it just totally fine in the spring. if we planted something like a warm season grass, like for example tall fescue, we would have a lot more problems getting people's yards to look nice during the spring because there would just be a lot of damage from all the cold in the winter. So we like Kentucky bluegrass. You can see down here, that's actually what we're standing on right here. Kentucky, this needs to be mowed. It's really, really long right now, but it's really soft. It's really forgiving. And let's see if I can find a good example of it down here. It can spread two different ways. It spreads by seeds, and it also spreads by, let's see if I can dig one up. Here we go. It also spreads by rhizomes. Here we go. That might be one in here. This little white guy right here. So it also spreads by rhizomes. Rhizomes are, some people call them runners, and strawberries really famously have them. So if you've ever seen a strawberry patch where it sends out all kinds of these like thick, almost root-looking things off to the side, and then a new plant will come up, those are rhizomes. And Kentucky bluegrass is really unique as a grass because it spreads those two ways, which means that if you play football on something like this, or if you play baseball, or if you're playing softball on something like this, and your cleats are really digging it up, like if it's really wet, the grass can actually repair itself from the side, and then it'll look really nice for the next people who come and play on it afterwards. So that's really cool. Then people don't have to put more grass seed down and things like that because it can actually heal itself and knit itself back together, which is fun. That's part of why we really like it.
So I see here there's a pivot irrigation system.
Yep.
What does your irrigation kind of schedule look like, or how often do you have to irrigate?
Oh, that's such a good question. It depends on the year. This year we had to do it a lot. We don't really have a prescribed schedule because, again, if you look back out here, we have some of the field is, mature sod that can handle drought stress better than other parts of our field that might be little baby seedlings or something like that. And so it really depends on the needs of the quadrants of the four different parts of the field. We can, that center pivot system is actually controlled from an app on my phone. And so when it's going around, I can tell it that I want it to turn on, at full rate for this section right down here because I know that they're little seedlings and they need some extra help in a drought. Or I could tell it maybe I want it to be at a half rate over here. It's not going to put on quite as much water because the mature sod over there maybe doesn't need as much help. So we try very hard to kind of tailor it so we're not wasting water. We don't like to run it when we don't have to because of course it's very expensive and very big. And when it goes around in a big circle, the wheels actually do some damage to the field because it's so heavy. And so we don't like it to run around when we don't need it to. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, and do you ever have to worry about weeds or diseases, insects?
Yeah, good question. So I'll start with the last one first because that's kind of easy. Typically speaking, we don't have to worry too much about insects because Kentucky bluegrass isn't usually very susceptible to big problems with them. Lots of people have heard of a bug called grubs, and grubs can do a lot of damage to a yard. They look like big, fat, white caterpillars, but they live underground and they like to eat plant roots. Grubs in general aren't a big problem for us because the grass is only here for a year in one season, and grubs really only do damage for one very small window of time every year. And so usually it's not an issue because we just are watching things closely and we don't have to worry about them too much. So that part is kind of easy for us. But yes, diseases and weeds, that is something we're always kind of on the lookout for. We do put down a weed preventer whenever we do our plantings because we don't want weed pressure when the seedlings are coming up because we just want the seedlings to have as little competition as possible. After that, we really only treat for weeds as we need to, and we do a lot of what we call spot spraying, which means we're not spraying the whole field, fence post to fence post. We're really doing more kind of maintenance spraying along the way. Maybe we'll do a second application of a preventer later in the season, but it all depends on the age and the stage of that particular 40 acres, if that makes sense. So we really try to tailor it as much as we can, and try to make things relevant as much as we possibly can to that space. And then for diseases, yes, there are some diseases for lawns that are really, really easy to predict in Iowa. And a lot of you will know and be familiar with one that's called rust. Rust is really, really common in cornfields, like across the road from us. And it almost always comes around in August, September. It's just when the weather conditions are perfect for it. And you would recognize it in your own yard if you've ever been playing in your yard and you look down and your shoes were orange for some reason. That is rust. We don't really worry about it too much because it doesn't do a lot of damage, but of course it's kind of gross. and like in your yard at home, it's kind of aesthetically, like, it doesn't look very nice, right? So we can treat for that if we want to. Usually we don't do too much about it. We can spray a fungicide to kind of clear it up, especially if it's a young stand like seedlings. We definitely want to be on top of it right away. There are some other diseases, but it always depends on weather conditions. And for us, that's kind of the big thing that we watch. We are really, really intentional about our feeding program here, and I think that's a big part of why we don't have a lot of disease pressure. That and Kentucky bluegrass, the cultivars we grow here, the types of Kentucky bluegrass we grow are disease resistant by genetic design. And so I think those things working together mean we don't have to worry about it quite as much as we used to back when I was a kid. So.
Okay, so the sample that you showed us earlier, how soon do you have to install that? How long will it last once it's cut?
Yeah, we always tell people to get it down within 24 hours. We never cut anything until it's within 2 hours of when a person is going to come and pick it up. And so the goal is that it would always be very fresh for people. It's like very farm fresh, like they've got the maximum amount of time to get it home and get it put down and things like that. I will say though, in the heat of summer, on a July day with 110 degree heat outside, like it's probably more like 12 hours instead of 24 hours. But as long as people get it down quickly and they water it right away, it should be fine.
Do you do any of the installing, or do people always come and pick it up?
Yeah, when I was a kid, we did have teams of people that would go out and install, but we don't anymore. We just focus on growing the grass. We just do production here.
Okay, so last couple minutes, what is your favorite thing about growing sod, and any advice or tips for someone who might be interested in going into turf management?
Oh, goodness. Okay, yeah. My favorite thing about, like, my favorite thing to do regarding growing sod, I love to mow. I love being in that big mower and going back and forth. It's really, really good. Like, it's just like therapy. Like it's beautiful, and the birds like swoop in, and you just get to see all these like fun things while you're out in the field, and it's just really gorgeous. My favorite thing in general about being a sod farmer is I get to see what I grow in my community all the time. So I get to see, like, if a new development with lots of new houses are being built, I can go to that development and see that the thing that I grew made that development even more beautiful. I know that the thing that I grow makes oxygen for us to breathe and sequesters CO2 that we need to happen. I know that it filters rainwater. I always feel very proud when I go to a sports field here in town and I'm watching people play, and I know that that grass came from our field, and people are having fun on it, and it's just great. I like knowing that the thing that I make makes communities and memories for people. That is really meaningful. And then as far as advice for people going into turf management, our big push here is a lot of soil health stuff. So anything you can possibly do to learn more about soil sampling and taking really good care of topsoils, and it will just get you so much farther ahead, because you'll not have to deal with nearly as many diseases, nearly as many problems, and you'll have a more beautiful product when it's all said and done, because you're taking good care of the soil. I think that would be maybe the main thing that I would say. And also install like 6 weather apps on your phone, because they never agree, and that's always helpful. Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. It's been such a pleasure to learn more about bluegrass and to visit your farm today and your business, and we're just very thankful that you partnered with us to do this farm chat. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks everybody.